Let's bring in our next guest. We've got Raphael Zagury joining us this morning, Chief Investment Officer at Schwab Bitcoin. Good to have you with us again here on the Future Show. Tell us what Bitcoin at current levels is telling us.
Good morning, Ben. Good to be here again. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I was listening to the comparisons between gold and Bitcoin, and I think what we've seen in Bitcoin is that Bitcoin, as you said, it's in a consolidation range. We saw a significant rally. We actually saw the largest sequential numbers of months that Bitcoin closed in positive numbers. So I think it's natural what we were saying. The other thing I would say, just to put in perspective, Bitcoin is up in a little bit more than 50% year to date, and gold is up like 14%. 14% for Bitcoin is a couple of days, right? Which is natural in an asset that it's on the early adoption phase. It is going to be more volatile. And most of the times, if you actually look historically on Bitcoin, it's an asset that spends a lot of time sideways, right? Actually, most of the time is moving sideways or down, which makes it a harder asset to hold long term because it feels like it's doing nothing. And then all of a sudden, the moves are concentrated in very small periods of time as more people realize the value of it, and they all try to jump into an asset that, as I said, it's still in an early adoption phase.
I would argue in many ways, all of the products that we look at here spend most of its time or their time in that sideways consolidation phase. We talk a lot about that here. The two phases of development, right? You have that vertical phase where you get high conviction, basically imbalance that creates oftentimes by news, and then you have acceptance that forms in terms of that horizontal. So you get that transition from vertical to horizontal. But yeah, the market spends most of the time in the horizontal phase. I guess one thing that's so impressive about Bitcoin is the really staggering the big moves up that we see in the vertical phase, right? And then again, establishing this trend that we've seen to the upside. It's pretty well defined here, to say the least. Talk to us about some of the fundamentals in terms of what we're seeing behind the rally, the move up, right? You've got the halving, as we've now seen dust settling from the ETF. We're sort of looking to that event, but you also have out there on the horizon expectations that we could see this Ether ETF approval ultimately, and potential impact there as well, furthering the demand narrative.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting things happening. So 9 days to Bitcoin halving. As we sit here today waiting for CPI to come out, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around if it's going to be 3.7, 3.8, 3.9. Nobody really knows, right? The beauty of Bitcoin is that
we do know.
Monetary policy. Sorry?
Is that we do know, right? We know that.
We do know.
That's right.
Exactly.
It's definitive.
I can point you exactly to the line of code that that it shows that the amount of the subsidy is going to be cut in half at block 840,000, right? And that if you look in terms of inflation, right, just to talk in terms of the financial markets, the inflation right now, it's around 1.7% annually for Bitcoin, and it's literally going to be cut down to half overnight in 9 days. And that's how we get to a cap of 21 million Bitcoins at the end of the day, which is another feature. We know that we're never going to have more than 21 million Bitcoins. But just going back to another point that you mentioned that I think it's important, I think one of the big questions we have right now as the ETF became available, and there are a lot of CIOs out there, just like myself, and particularly the ones I think in large wirehouses, they're starting to think and realize that, okay, this is a new asset. I need to take a look and I need to see how and if it fits in my portfolio. And a lot of them are looking at it and saying, well, maybe it is too late because price has moved a lot from where it was, right? So all of these things, I think, are on top of the mind of a lot of people. And this is when the reflection of that, it's seeing the price kind of moving sideways. The reality to all of that is that, as I said in the beginning, it's still super, super early. Bitcoin, it's still a drop in an ocean of liquidity in the world when you compare to other assets that became kind of like monetary assets, right? Think about the S&P, real estate, gold, all of these assets. There's still orders of magnitude of where Bitcoin is. And as Bitcoin captures some of that monetary premium, the upside is still, in my view, significant from where we are right now.
Okay, well, Raphael, that's where your role comes into play, right? Because you've developed several tools at Swan to show how or where Bitcoin should fit into your portfolio.
Correct. Yeah. I think one of the things we did through the last few years, that's one, is we were having conversations with I have a traditional finance background, right? I worked at Wall Street for a lot of my career. So one of the challenges that I had when having conversations with a lot of the CIOs and, people's in positions of allocating capital is they looked at Bitcoin as this foreign asset. So the way that we've looked at it when we had these conversations is just look at it as being just another asset, right? Think about Bitcoin as just being like a stock or a hedge fund manager or a private equity investment or whatever it is, and look at the returns, look at, historically what it has done in terms of risk-adjusted return. So we've developed a tool where you literally, and it's free, it's in nakamotoportfolio.com. Anybody can log in, plug in their portfolio, and then simulate and say, what happens if I add a 1%, a 5%, a 10% allocation to Bitcoin? What happens if I rebalance quarterly? What happens if I did that 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? And also some tools to look to forecast and look in the future. But again, these are all tools that financial markets have been using for a long time. The Markovitz modern portfolio theory, that it's not that modern anymore since it was written in the 50s. But anyway, we use the same tools that a lot of people use, and they can plug in and see how Bitcoin would perform in a portfolio. It answers, I think the benefit of that, it answers very quickly questions around, well, isn't this too volatile to my portfolio? Mm-hmm. And what you see, yeah, it does have volatility, but with volatility, of course, comes, returns. And it's the lack of correlation makes that volatility when you fit in a portfolio, you feel it a little bit less, mm-hmm. because when it's going down, it's peer-to-peer your portfolio. It's mm-hmm. not necessarily going down as well.
Well, we've talked about that quite a bit in the past, right? Lack of correlation for one, volatility. We were discussing that yesterday. In fact, as a retail trader, that's one of the things that kind of keeps me away from it a little bit. I was hoping the ETF would minimize that a little bit, but it really hasn't. And kind of getting back to the ETF, maybe it's because we haven't seen that full adoption yet. I see in your notes you talk about Morgan and Merrill. They're still in the process, right, of approving these ETFs. So again, we could get some further adoption there. But you also mentioned in your notes, when comparing Bitcoin to other assets that have morphed into savings technologies like real estate, gold, we talk a lot about stocks and others. The market is massive, right? You say Bitcoin truly becomes a savings technology. If it becomes that, then the upside's still significant from here.
Correct. Yeah. So 2 points there that you mentioned. First of all, in terms of the volatility and the adoption, yes, as I said, it's still super early. And I actually see volatility in Bitcoin as a feature and not a bug. Yeah. Because it means, again, that it's still in that early adoption phase. I can tell, like, if many of the startups out there had a ticker somewhere that you could follow where it's going and what it's doing on a minute-by-minute basis, you'd be shocked by the volatility that you would see, right? A lot of the assets, like, turning to real estate, for example, people have the perception that real estate is not volatile because of mark-to-market bias, right? They're not mark-to-marking their real estate position mm-hmm. every single day. They'll mm-hmm. market every other time when they say that, their neighbor sold a house, or they see that activity is happening, or they list their house. And that gives, I think, the illusion of stability when in fact, day to day, if you actually had a ticker.
Yeah. We see that with gold and with stocks. I mean, we have to, so you see it there.
Correct, exactly. And just on your second question regarding the other assets, right? If we think about, savings, right? We all work. At the end of the month, we have some capital that is left, and that's true for the lawyer, mm-hmm. for the doctor, for mm-hmm. all of us, right? And then we need to make a decision what we do with that capital, because we know that if we just leave the capital sitting in our checking account after 3, 5, 10 years, it's going to be debased and eaten away by inflation. Mm-hmm. So people have found ways to protect against that, and I think the top 2 ones that come to mind, of course, the S&P 500, right, and real estate. Mm-hmm. So let's pick real estate. And now, exactly. Yeah. So let's think about real estate and compare that to Bitcoin.
Raphael, example, right? I apologize. We're going to have to hold that for a different conversation. We can have you back to extend these thoughts, because we do have the CPI number headed our way in just about 60 seconds. I want to be able to get to that as well. But I like the idea in terms of looking at this as a savings asset ultimately, because a savings technology, there's a fair amount to discuss there. And I appreciate you joining us here to scratch the surface on this discussion. We'll definitely have Raphael back. Raphael Zagury joining us, Chief Investment Officer at Swan Bitcoin.